Imagine holding in your hands the light switch of the global economy. This isn't a metaphor. It's a corridor of water 34 kilometers wide, so narrow you could drive across it in 20 minutes. And yet, that passageway controls 20% of all the oil that moves the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is not a shipping route. It's the jugular of the world. And right now, with the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran entering its third week, someone has their fingers pressed tight around that jugular. To understand what's happening, you first have to understand the geography, because the geography here isn't context. The geography is the weapon. The strait connects the Persian Gulf to the Indian Ocean through two shipping lanes just 3 kilometers wide each. Through those lanes, before the conflict, nearly 20 million barrels of oil passed every single day. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, everything moves through there. There's no detour, no secret shortcut, no back door. You either cross the strait or you don't reach any market in the world. Iran has known this for decades. That's why the Strait of Hormuz isn't just geography. It's the gun Tehran has always carried in its pocket, loaded, safety off, waiting for the right moment. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes against Iran in what they called Operation Epic Fury. Military installations, nuclear sites, the country's leadership. In the days that followed, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. The world held its breath. Iran responded with missiles and drones against Israel and American bases in the Gulf. And then it did exactly what it had always promised it would do if that day ever came. It pulled the trigger. A general of the Revolutionary Guard left no room for interpretation. The words were precise, cold, calculated. Not a single drop of oil would leave the Persian Gulf. This was not war rhetoric. It wasn't a speech for the cameras. Tanker traffic collapsed almost immediately, dropping nearly 70%. More than 150 vessels anchored just outside the strait, loaded with crude, unable to move, waiting for a signal that never came. 150 ships. 150 crews with families waiting back home. 150 cargoes the world needed and couldn't touch. Markets took only hours to process what was happening. Just hours. Brent crude surpassed $100 a barrel on March 8th and kept climbing, reaching 126 at its peak. Some analysts whispered about 150. The closure was described as the largest disruption to the global energy supply since the oil crisis of the 1970s. An entire generation that had never seen anything like it woke up staring at gas prices with a mixture of disbelief and dread. But oil is only the visible part of the problem, the part that makes headlines. Underneath, there's another story, quieter and more dangerous. Ras Laffan, Qatar's massive industrial complex sitting right on the edge of the Persian Gulf, also went dark. This complex doesn't just produce gas. It produces fertilizers like urea and ammonia, the same ones that feed the farmland of half of Asia. It produces sulfur. And it produces helium, a gas that for most people brings to mind birthday balloons, but that is actually essential for manufacturing semiconductors, the chips inside your phone, inside airplanes, inside hospital equipment. Without Qatari helium, those production chains start breaking down. And the first ones to feel it aren't the factories in Silicon Valley. They're the countries already living on the edge. Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. Nations that depend on Qatar for more than half of their gas supply woke up staring at a future of blackouts, shortages, and bills they couldn't pay. The United Nations was direct about it. The blockade could push global hunger to a historic record. Not because oil is edible, but because without fertilizers, there are no harvests. Without gas, there are no working stoves. Without energy, the humanitarian aid trucks don't reach the places that were already on the brink. A 34-kilometer strait, and the world starts going hungry. There's something about that sentence that doesn't quite fit inside your head, no matter how many times you read it. To understand why Iran holds this kind of power, with military resources that don't come close to matching those of the United States, you have to look beyond aircraft carriers and missile defense systems. Iran controls the longest coastline of the strait and the inner islands. From there it can monitor, harass, and strike any vessel attempting to cross. It doesn't need a conventional navy for that. Fast boats, coastal missiles, mines scattered in the night, and drones that cost less than a family car are enough. This is asymmetric warfare taken to the water. A billion-dollar destroyer can't stop a speedboat carrying a $20,000 missile. The most expensive technology in the world becomes clumsy when faced with the speed and cheapness of the small. Washington understood this too late. The Pentagon and the National Security Council significantly underestimated, and that word matters, significantly underestimated Iran's willingness to actually close the strait when they planned the operation. What was supposed to be a short surgical intervention turned into a global energy crisis that nobody had fully calculated. The gap between the war plan and the reality of its consequences turned out to be enormous. Trump moved quickly to pressure his allies. He wanted warships in the strait. He wanted Europe, Japan, South Korea, and China to contribute to escorting tankers and forcing the reopening. The response came as a joint statement from the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Japan, and Canada, condemning Iran and pledging willingness to help ensure safe passage. It sounded firm. It sounded like a coalition ready to act. But analysts were quick to point out what those words didn't say. Nobody offered warships with active hostilities underway. It was a rhetorical posture designed to pressure Iran, not a real commitment. Japan is the most honest example of the trap the world has walked itself into. It depends enormously on Gulf oil. It has security treaties with the United States. Trump pressured Japan directly, questioned its loyalty, implied that the alliance had a price that needed to be paid. But sending Japanese warships into an active conflict in the Middle East is not a decision any prime minister makes on a phone call. Putting their naval forces into that scenario could activate fronts that have nothing to do with the strait. It could reshape decades of carefully constructed foreign policy. It could cost someone their job, or something far worse. This is what makes Hormuz different from every other crisis. It's not just oil that's at stake. It's that every move to reopen it creates new tensions downstream, as if each solution generates its own problem. The United States began acting alone. Central Command announced the sinking of 9 Iranian warships and the destruction of Iran's naval headquarters in Bandar Abbas. It then bombed the military installations on the Iranian island of Karg, through which the vast majority of Iranian oil is exported. Trump threatened to go further, to destroy the oil facilities on the island entirely if Iran didn't open the strait. Iran responded by striking the UAE's oil port of Fujairah. Every action has its reaction. The strait stayed closed. And with every escalation, the world moved one step closer to a conflict whose ceiling nobody could calculate. Meanwhile, Iran has been playing ambiguity like a master. Because the closure has not been total or absolute. Iran has kept its own oil flowing through the strait since the conflict began, strictly controlling who gets to use it. It sells passage to whoever serves its interests. On March 9th, it declared it would guarantee safe passage to any country that expelled the ambassadors of the United States and Israel. Diplomatic blackmail turned into navigation policy. Entire countries forced to choose between their declared alliances and their actual energy needs, between their stated values and their real bills. And here is the uncomfortable truth that governments don't want to say out loud, because admitting it implies responsibility. The world built decades of energy dependence on a single assumption, that the strait would always be open, that nobody would actually close it, that the threat was a diplomatic tool, not a real decision waiting to be made. There was no real plan B. Strategic oil reserves exist, yes, but they were designed for disruptions lasting weeks, not months. Goldman Sachs projected that elevated prices could persist through 2027 if the supply disruption continues. 2 years. 2 years of expensive oil, scarce fertilizers, semiconductors that are hard to produce, and growing hunger in countries that had no margin left to absorb any more shocks. Alternative routes exist on maps, but not in reality. The pipeline that crosses Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea has limited capacity. It doesn't come close to handling the daily volume that moves through Hormuz. It's like trying to drain a lake with a garden hose. The problem isn't that it doesn't work, it's that it's nowhere near enough. Something gets lost sometimes between the numbers and the geopolitical analysis. There are people on those 150 anchored ships. There are families in Pakistan who cooked less this week because gas is scarce. There are hospitals in developing countries staring at their semiconductor equipment reserves and running numbers that don't add up. There are farmers who didn't get their fertilizers in time for this season's planting. The consequences of this strait are not measured only in barrels or GDP percentage points. They're measured in daily decisions that millions of people are making right now because someone pressed in exactly the right place. 34 kilometers, 2 lanes, 3 kilometers wide each. Without them, the industrialized world starts to choke. With them closed for just 3 weeks, ships are already burning, prices are at historic highs, presidents are making threatening phone calls, and international organizations are talking about record-breaking hunger. The Strait of Hormuz is not just where oil passes. It's where the world proves, every time someone dares to press on it, just how fragile the structure beneath its prosperity really is. A prosperity that for decades assumed the geography would always be on its side, that the guns in people's pockets were just decoration. This time, it wasn't.